Hey, my name is Renee Hollopeter. I write short fiction, and this is my short story called Her. Her brown hair was messy. It was the first thing I noticed about her. It was definitely brown, a warm, true brown, but its texture and type I couldn't quite figure out. I suppose the texture of her hair is a trivial thing, but it was the subject onto which I projected most of my mental energy for the first few weeks I knew her. Her hair was curly, but not curly curly. The kind of curly with ringlets in the back that slowly faded into waves in the front with just a few ring-lidded wisps framing her face. A lot like mine, actually, but you could tell she didn't brush it, and that's what I think gave her that appeal. It suggested that she didn't care, or at least she cared about more important things, like playing the drums with strangers and leaving the National Art Gallery to make herself acquainted with interesting strangers. Sometimes she would just throw it up into a bun. I thought it was cute how drips of water from her post-shower, still wet hair would run down from the back of her neck and leave dark spots on the back of her t-shirt. I remember the first day she came to work like this because it was the first day I noticed her freckles. Her messy brown hair made the freckles appear more of an afterthought, but that day it was like they wanted to be noticed, like they wanted me to stare at them. Like they wanted me to watch the way their position on her face shifted as she laughed or smiled or squinted in confusion, instead of walking up to the customers in the front and asking if I could help them find anything, or tuning that piano I had been half-heartedly working on for a little under an hour. The water marks on her shirt were fading, but if I really focused, I could still notice the droplets gathered where her hair met the back of her neck, making the loose wisps of dry hair glisten. For a second, I imagined what it would be like if those droplets were sweat instead of water, and if they were there because of me, late at night when we were laying in bed together, skin to skin and out of breath, but then I felt guilty about it and redirected my attention to tuning the piano. The first time I felt that way about a girl was when I was a kid. I doubt I was any older than 6 or 7, but I was still old enough to recognize how I felt as a crush. Of course, not the kind of crush slightly more emotionally evolved teenagers form when they're obsessive and idealistic, or even the ones adults form when they're reserved and aching for affection, but the kind little kids have that can't be characterized by anything other than admiration, fixation, and a fluttering little heart. She was older than me, probably by 3 or 4 years, and we jumped on the trampoline together at our mutual friend's house. I knew she was older than me and cooler than me and more mature than me, but she was still so nice. She had short, messy blonde hair organized into a pixie cut. It felt wrong to feel that way about a girl, especially because somehow my young brain was able to recognize the feeling as the same feeling I had felt about a boy in my class at the beginning of the school year. I knew I was supposed to feel that way about boys. My parents and aunts and girlfriends at school and favorite movies and TV told me. But she was a girl, and although I had never explicitly been told so, I knew she wasn't supposed to happen. But she had short hair and looked like a boy I had seen on TV before. That must be why I have a crush on a girl, I remember thinking. She just looks like a boy. But when I saw her messy brown hair and her freckles and the rest of her, I was acutely aware of her femininity. My attraction to her couldn't hide behind any masculine presentation on her part. Her messy brown hair was obvious and wasn't apologizing for its playfulness, its flirtatiousness. Her freckles had a blatant feminine charm that was girl-like and wonderful. I found myself drawn to the way her lips reminded me of violins, widening from her waist, followed by a slight concave, and then followed again by the round curve of her outer thighs. I noticed her long, sleek legs, the round fullness of her breast, the way she sat with her thighs tucked up to her chest, slumped over in her chair. Everything about her appearance and mannerisms were, without question, unmistakably feminine. She's a girl, I thought to myself over and over. She doesn't look like a boy. She's a girl. It was initially all just physical attraction. I thought she was adorable and then beautiful and then so smashingly stunning that I couldn't even look at her without blushing or fearing my heart might fall out of my chest from beating so quickly, which was when I knew it wasn't just curiosity that drew me to her. It wasn't the allure of being with a woman that made me nervous. I knew I was in love with her when I thought about what it would be like if I brought her home to meet my dad. It's funny, I never used to get nervous about bringing guys home to meet him because there was something so comfortable about masculine energy meeting masculine energy, security in knowing everything was the way it should be. I knew my dad might act a little tough, like fathers are supposed to, and my male love interest would act a little shy, but also a little cocky and self-assured. So my dad would act masculine in his protectiveness, and the guy would act masculine in his underlying entitlement to my affection, and that would be that. It might be awkward, and there would be nothing left to figure out. Their relationship would be written out for them. But I couldn't stop writing out this new scenario in my head, what it would be like if I took her home to meet him, or even if I had the chance. In my head, my dad wouldn't know how to act first. She would be goofy and slightly ridiculous and unreserved, and how could he not love that? Before we'd go back out for the night, probably to get ice cream, and my father would say, "You girls be safe," we would eat dinner together, and she would talk about tuning the string instruments at the shop. She would tell the story of how we first started talking while she noticed me half-assing my way through the sale of an upright bass, and how adorable she thought it was that I had no clue what I was recommending but would never let that be known. My father and I would laugh, maybe I would make a comment about how that was so Pisces of me, and then she would talk about how much she hates astrology. When I think of it now, I'm sure she would have said something about how people get to decide who they are for themselves. To get the chance for this to happen, I would have to talk to her about something more than just tuning and selling and telling people about instruments. We talked a lot at work about instruments, what she liked to play, what I liked to play, what we wished we could play. We would even play for each other or together. Sometimes it felt exactly like what coworkers at a music shop would do, but sometimes it felt like what two people who were deeply infatuated with each other but didn't have the guts to admit it would do. The first time I brought up something besides work, I brought up Big Sur. I told her about the time I drove from Berkeley with my dad for his birthday weekend to go camping, and I told her about how the people there reminded me of her, which, in retrospect, was a pretty stupid thing to say. Nobody ever reminds me of her, and nobody before I met her ever did. There are people similar to her, with messy hair and long legs and a harmonious laugh, but nobody is ever the perfect combination of those things, along with all the other things, like her vernacular that was specific to her, and her happy cynicism, and her ability to talk to strangers. But I think I was just referring to the effortlessness and the way people there always dress like they're hiking. Regardless, I told her that, and she said she had never been. I told her about the way the rolling green mountains with rocky crags kiss the turquoise ocean, and how when you see Big Sur, you're convinced it's the only place on the planet where that happens. This was about 4 months into the job, so given our already blossoming friendship, she told me I would have to take her there. I liked the way she said I would have to take her there, like she was mine to take around and introduce things to. When I wasn't busy helping an elementary-aged boy pick out his first guitar or tuning the display piano so that people could come in and play chopsticks or the right-hand melody of Fur Elise, I would think about taking her to Big Sur. I imagined she would tie her messy brown hair back into a bandana. I thought about how we would hike, go to the beach, and pull over to the side of the road to take pictures of each other and smell the wild sage, but I also thought about how Big Sur would finally be the time when I would get a sign from her. And if not a sign that she was also hopelessly in love with me and intoxicated by my very existence, at least a sign that I could kiss her outside of our tent before we went in for the night. I got lots of signs in the weeks following our discussion about Big Sur. She would come up from behind me and wrap her arms around my shoulders and ask me about the kind of food they have in Big Sur. I would catch her staring at me while I was working and she wasn't. But instead of meeting me with a coquettish grin and smooth ocean eyes like almost lovers might, she met me with a big goofy laugh that was confusingly flirtatious and platonic all at once. Eventually, a pretty big sign was when she started asking me about how much it would cost. For, say, a weekend trip? She said, sure, for a weekend trip, 2 nights and 3 days. I thought about it and threw a number out there, $100 for the two of us. Berkeley is 144 miles from Big Sur, so an entire tank of gas would be enough, say $40 for gas. $40 for a total of 5 hours with her and her Forester, during which she sang loudly All of Rumors by Fleetwood Mac, the only CD that was in the pocket behind the passenger seat. We joked about the folk songs people would come in and play on the fiddles, some Irish, but mostly just American folk songs that we couldn't remember the lyrics to or the names of. Then there was the campground, which was $10 per car per night, so $20 for lodging. $20 for 2 nights in the same tent, drunk off of hard pear cider, laughing about the time she slept with some guy from the Berkeley tennis team at a party just because her friend bet her she couldn't pull it off. And that time in high school when I had sex in my dad's truck when it was broken down in our backyard and we just wanted somewhere to be alone. I didn't tell her about how I hoped someday I'd get to do that with her, but I wanted to. We stopped at Trader Joe's and bought some food for the weekend, which included their off-brand version of Swedish fish that she claimed were much better than the real thing, plus the obvious meal foods and that pear cider. That bill came to $50. $50 to learn how she hardly won't eat any carbohydrates aside from white potatoes and white bread. $50 to watch the small bites that she takes when she tries something new she isn't entirely sure she'll like the tempeh I fried over the fire, since it wasn't something she grew up with her mom making for her. There were a few other expenses too, like the cost to park the Forester at the state park. That was $20 to watch the setting sun with her over the Pacific, to see the look on her face that everyone gets when they witness the edge of the earth, the way the steep, welcomely overbearing cliffs surrender to the deceptively gentle sweep of the ocean. The look reads pure wonder. You can't act like you've seen something like it before, like it's something you're used to. Every pair of eyes accepts it as something greater than they could ever understand or ration with, something beyond the false knowingness of human intellect. $20 to fall even more in love with her at that moment. Her, the girl who genuinely believes she understands the ins and outs of human cloning, just 2 years into her molecular biology major at Berkeley, coming face to face with something she could not comprehend. It was something nature put in front of her, something that was there long before the two of us were and would remain there long after we returned north, regardless of who acknowledges it or yields to it, and she was speechless. She didn't try to explain it or confront it with logic. She sat with it, submitted to the mystery and the forces at work, and watched the sun return to the Pacific. I watched the way her messy brown hair glowed in the twilight. There were 2 other things, too, I guess. She bought a t-shirt from the general store that had a painted picture of the same view we watched that night at the state park. That shirt was $25. She wore it by the fire that night and realized as we were packing up to leave on Sunday morning that it smelled too strong of smoke for her to tolerate. She asked if I would wash it for her and bring it into work, since she probably didn't do laundry as often as I did. I guess she wanted to wear it sooner than her procrastination would allow her to. I told her I would, but I never brought it into work, nor did I wash it, and she never asked about it. The only remaining thing was the bra I bought from a little Berkeley boutique, the kind that's expensive without trying to be, right before the trip. It was ambitious of me to assume I would need a new long-line cream lace bra that was the perfect mix of feminine and minimal on our weekend trip together outside of work, but I saw the way she looked at me and smiled as I showed kids how to use a bow on a cello, and the way she snuck up from me behind to wrap her arms around my shoulder just to tell a joke. That bra was $40. $40 to nervously pack the bra into my backpack, running my fingers over the back where the delicate lace details stopped and the fasten began. I pictured her hands working on the fasten while I straddled her in the tent at night after a long night of talking and drinking in front of the fire. I could picture it in my head. We'd be sitting side by side on the blanket, and I would say something about the sunset we saw, how nature does what it needs to do without question, and how beautiful that is. I don't know how I expected her, the girl who despises poetry, to recognize that as in advance, but I did. I said all those things too. She just nodded. She talked a lot that night about how she wishes she could stop having such casual sex with guys, and asked how I managed to get through life without succumbing to every hot, horny person. And I said something about how it's hard because I really, truly, deeply want to. And she said maybe we had something to learn from each other, but it never went any further than that. I'm not sure why I expected it to just happen so naturally like that. I think I might rely too much on neo-spiritual stuff. I see too many parallels between humanity and nature and take advice from them, assuming everyone else does as well and that they understand. I thought being in Big Sur would help her understand how I love her and how, to a certain degree, she'd love me too. She never admitted it. Maybe she never even recognized it as the kind of love I did, but I felt it. I thought she would be in Big Sur and be completely humbled by the sunset and the cliffs and the ocean, and then look over at me with a kind of knowingness, like, oh, now I understand. I'm in love with her. Every ounce of me hoped she would. I also trusted the stars, since I'm a Pisces and she's a Virgo, and the two of us are supposed to join for supremely emotional relationships. But maybe the comment she made in my imagination was true. Maybe people decide what they do with themselves, and that's that. So it was really $195 for that weekend. A few weeks after that weekend, she moved east to Massachusetts, where she transferred to from Berkeley. We went out drinking one Saturday between the trip and her last day, and we were still friendly at work, but nothing escalated. The trip initially seemed like an investment in something that would perpetuate into something bigger, like being girlfriends and holding hands at the Berkeley Student Farmers Market and sloppy, half-awake morning kisses. But it only turns into anything like that about half of the time. The other half of the time, it's just about exactly what it was. And when it's like that, the whole experience feels tangible. It's not some big picture thing. It's more like a cardboard box that you hold in your arms and see everything inside it for what it is. Not an investment, not even a recognition of your life as being out of alignment or a radical new awareness of yourself and your identity. It was just about loving her. Everything about who she was, her quirks, her smile, her presence, I was in love with it. That was all there was. It was about one soul recognizing the beauty in another without question or shame. So I spent April to August working in the music shop near campus, and I spent $195. I put that in, and I got an imaginary box in my arms filled with my love for her, a bra with the tag still attached, and a Big Sur t-shirt that smelled like campfire smoke. A few weeks ago, I took the shirt to consignment and found a few pieces of messy brown hair on it still. They didn't look as messy when they didn't belong to her.